The entire garage went silent the moment the engine came back to life. Mechanics who had spent 2 days trying to fix the race car stepped back in shock as a quiet single dad wiped grease from his hands and calmly closed the hood. But instead of thanking him, the company's new CEO walked in furious. He accused the man of touching equipment he wasn't qualified to repair, and fired him on the spot. What the CEO didn't know was that this same man had secretly designed nearly every championship-winning engine the company ever built. And by morning, the biggest race of the year was about to become a disaster. Marcus Reed's mornings always started before sunrise. By 5:30, he was already standing in the tiny kitchen of his small rented house, carefully packing his daughter Lily's lunch while coffee quietly brewed beside him. The old clock above the refrigerator ticked louder than the rest of the house, filling the silence left behind after years of learning how to live without anyone else there. Lily walked into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and carrying a half-finished school project made from cardboard and glue sticks. Her messy ponytail leaned sideways, and she rubbed her eyes while dropping into the chair beside the counter. "You forgot to sleep again, didn't you?" she asked. Marcus smiled faintly while placing apple slices into a plastic container. "I slept. For like 10 minutes. 20. That's worse." He laughed quietly under his breath. Lily was only 10, but she noticed everything. Sometimes too much. She noticed when bills piled up near the microwave. She noticed when Marcus skipped dinner because he claimed he already ate at work. And she noticed the dark circles under his eyes every single morning. Still, Marcus never let his exhaustion enter her world. To Lily, he was simply Dad. The man who braided her hair badly, burned pancakes every Sunday, and somehow fixed anything that stopped working. After walking Lily to the school bus stop, Marcus drove across the city toward Titan Apex Racing, one of the biggest motorsport companies in the country. Massive banners of championship-winning race cars hung outside the building, along with giant smiling photos of executives who spent more time giving interviews than touching engines. Marcus parked near the back beside the service entrance, far away from the polished executive parking area. He grabbed his worn toolbox from the passenger seat and headed inside without saying much to anyone. Most employees barely noticed him anymore. To newer workers, Marcus was just another maintenance mechanic who handled difficult repairs and impossible deadlines without complaining. Quiet, reliable, forgettable. But the older mechanics watched him differently. They noticed how Marcus could identify engine problems by sound alone. They noticed how he never used instruction manuals during repairs. And they especially noticed that when expensive prototype systems failed, senior engineers secretly waited for Marcus to examine them before making any major decisions. That morning, tension filled the garage. The company's newest race car sat surrounded by stressed engineers arguing over diagnostic screens. The upcoming Grand Crown Championship was only 3 days away, and the vehicle's engine kept failing during high-speed simulations. Ethan Cole stood nearby wearing an expensive tailored suit completely untouched by grease or dust. At 32 years old, he had recently become the youngest CEO in company history after Titan Apex's aging founder retired earlier that year. Ethan believed the company needed modernization, faster systems, younger talent, fresh energy, and in his opinion, older mechanics like Marcus represented the past. "This makes no sense," one engineer muttered while staring at data graphs. "The pressure readings collapse the second the RPM climbs. We already replaced the fuel system twice," another replied. Ethan folded his arms impatiently. "I was told this car would dominate the championship." "It should," the lead engineer answered nervously. "But something inside the engine timing keeps destabilizing under stress." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then fix it." Marcus quietly rolled a cart of tools past the group without interrupting. But as he walked by, his eyes briefly shifted toward the exposed engine. Only for a second. Still, one older mechanic named Daniel noticed. Daniel stepped away from the group and followed Marcus toward the back workstations. "You heard all that?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded once. "And?" Marcus placed a wrench onto the table before answering. "Timing compensation is fighting the pressure control system." Daniel blinked. "You figured that out already?" Marcus shrugged. "Probably. Then why not say something?" Marcus gave a tired smile. "Nobody asked." Before Daniel could respond, Ethan suddenly approached from across the garage. "Why is everyone standing around?" Ethan snapped. The employees quickly scattered back toward the race car. Ethan stopped when he noticed Marcus nearby. Ethan said sharply. Maintenance requests are downstairs. This area is restricted during race prep. Marcus nodded calmly. Understood. For a moment, Ethan continued staring at him like he wanted to say more. But instead, he turned away and resumed talking with executives entering the garage for inspection meetings. Daniel exhaled slowly after Ethan walked off. He treats people like machines, Daniel muttered. Marcus simply returned to work. Hours passed. The engineers continued replacing expensive components while stress spread through the building. Simulation after simulation failed. Every attempt created new problems. By evening, frustration filled the garage. This is impossible, one engineer groaned. We're running out of time. Ethan rubbed his forehead aggressively before finally dismissing everyone for the night. We start again at 6 a.m., he ordered. Nobody touches the car until then. The exhausted team slowly left the building. One by one, the lights across the garage shut off until silence replaced the chaos from earlier. Marcus remained behind cleaning tools near the back workshop. Daniel approached him while putting on his jacket. You're thinking about that engine, aren't you? Marcus stayed quiet for a moment. Then he sighed softly. The calibration system was rewritten. Daniel frowned. How can you tell? Because it's fighting itself. Daniel crossed his arms. You know you could solve this in an hour. Maybe. Then why walk away? Marcus looked toward the giant race car sitting alone under the dim garage lights. Some people don't want help, he said quietly. Daniel stared at him carefully before speaking again. You built half the systems inside that car. Marcus immediately looked away. That was a long time ago. Doesn't change the truth. Marcus closed his toolbox gently. Good night, Daniel. After Daniel finally left, silence filled the garage completely. Marcus stood still for several seconds. Then slowly, he walked toward the race car. The massive vehicle reflected the overhead lights like polished black glass. Expensive, powerful, complicated. Yet Marcus looked at it the way an old musician looks at a familiar instrument. He removed the engine cover carefully. His eyes moved across the machinery with quiet recognition. Within minutes, he found the problem. Someone had modified the adaptive timing sequence without fully understanding how the pressure balancing system reacted under race conditions. The engine wasn't broken. It was confused. Marcus connected a diagnostic tablet and began rewriting several calibration layers with calm precision. His fingers moved quickly, almost effortlessly, as though he had done it hundreds of times before. Because he had. 40 minutes later, he stepped back and closed the hood. The garage remained silent. Marcus inserted the ignition key. The engine exploded to life instantly. Smooth, stable, perfect. The deep controlled roar echoed through the empty building like thunder. Marcus allowed himself the smallest smile. But then another voice suddenly cut through the garage behind him. What do you think you're doing? Marcus slowly turned around. Ethan Cole stood near the entrance, staring at him in disbelief. The sound of the engine still echoed through the garage as Ethan walked closer, his polished shoes striking the concrete floor with sharp, angry steps. Marcus calmly removed his hands from the diagnostic tablet and stepped away from the race car without saying a word. For a brief second, neither man spoke. Then Ethan looked at the perfectly stable engine display screen before turning back toward Marcus with visible disbelief. You touched the championship car? Ethan asked coldly. Marcus answered honestly. I corrected the calibration conflict. Ethan let out a short laugh filled with frustration. Corrected it? The timing system was rewritten incorrectly. And who exactly gave you permission to interfere with a multi-million-dollar race vehicle? Marcus stayed calm. Nobody. That answer only made Ethan angrier. Within minutes, several night supervisors and mechanics who had remained in nearby departments entered the garage after hearing the engine restart. Daniel arrived last, immediately noticing the tension in the room. Ethan pointed directly at Marcus. This is exactly the problem with this company, he snapped loudly. People ignoring structure and acting outside their role. Daniel stepped forward carefully. Sir, maybe we should look at the diagnostics first. I don't care about the diagnostics, Ethan interrupted. He had no authority to touch this vehicle. Marcus quietly unplugged the tablet and placed it on the workbench. The engine is stable now, he said. Ethan crossed his arms. That isn't the point. To Marcus, it clearly was the point. But he could already see where this was heading. The younger engineers standing nearby exchanged uncertain looks while staring at the now perfectly running engine. Some of them looked impressed. Others looked nervous. Ethan turned toward the supervisors. Effective immediately, Marcus Reed is terminated for violating company protocol. The entire garage went silent. Daniel looked stunned. You're firing him? Yes. For fixing the car. For unauthorized interference, Ethan corrected sharply. Marcus showed almost no reaction. That somehow made the situation even more uncomfortable. Most people expected anger, defensiveness, an argument. Instead, Marcus simply walked toward his old locker near the back wall. Daniel followed him quickly. Marcus, say something. Marcus opened the locker slowly and removed a faded photograph of Lily that had been taped inside for years. There's nothing to say. This is insane. Marcus gave a small shrug while placing the photo carefully into his jacket pocket. It's his company. No, Daniel muttered quietly. Not really. Marcus looked at him briefly but didn't respond. Across the garage, Ethan instructed supervisors to reset all system access codes connected to Marcus's workstation. The message was clear. Erase him quickly. As Marcus closed his toolbox, several older mechanics approached him awkwardly. One of them cleared his throat. You really fixed it that fast? Marcus nodded once. Then why didn't you tell Ethan? Marcus rested one hand on the toolbox handle. He already decided who I was before tonight. Nobody had an answer for that. Marcus carried his toolbox toward the exit while dozens of employees silently watched him leave. Some looked guilty, others confused. Daniel caught up to him outside near the parking lot. You can't just walk away. Marcus opened the passenger door of his truck and carefully set the toolbox inside. I have to pick Lily up from school early tomorrow, he said calmly. Her class presentation got moved. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. Marcus, you just lost your job. I know. And you're talking about a school project. Marcus finally looked directly at him. She matters more. Daniel's expression softened immediately. That was Marcus. Always the same. No matter how difficult life became, Lily remained the center of everything. Before Daniel could say anything else, Marcus quietly drove away into the night. Back at Titan Apex Racing, the mood inside the building became increasingly tense. At first, Ethan felt satisfied with his decision. To him, discipline mattered more than individual talent. Companies needed hierarchy, not employees acting independently. But that confidence lasted less than 12 hours. The next morning, engineers gathered around the race car again for another full simulation test. At first, everything looked stable. Then, halfway through the run, warning alarms suddenly exploded across every monitor. Temperature spikes, pressure fluctuations, power instability. The engine violently shut itself down. What happened? Ethan demanded. The lead engineer looked panicked. The timing compensation collapsed again. That's impossible, another engineer argued. The system was stable last night. Ethan immediately looked toward Marcus's now empty workstation. For the first time, uncertainty appeared on his face. The team spent the next several hours desperately trying to recreate whatever Marcus had changed, but nothing worked. Every adjustment created new problems somewhere else inside the system. The race deadline continued getting closer. And pressure from sponsors was growing fast. Executives flooded Ethan's office throughout the afternoon asking for updates. Investors wanted reassurance. Racing partners demanded answers. Ethan gave confident responses publicly, but privately his frustration kept building. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat inside Lily's classroom listening to children nervously present science projects made from cardboard and glue. Lily stood beside her display holding a small homemade wind turbine built mostly from recycled parts Marcus had helped her collect. My dad says machines work better when people stop trying to make them look impressive and just let them do their job, she explained proudly to the class. Several parents smiled softly. Marcus sat quietly near the back of the room wearing simple work clothes, looking more tired than usual but fully focused on Lily. When the presentation ended, Lily ran toward him excitedly. I didn't forget any lines. You did great. You're not at work today. Marcus hesitated briefly before answering. Just taking a break. Lily studied his face carefully. You got fired. Marcus blinked slowly. How did you know? You only wear that jacket during daytime when something bad happens. Despite everything, Marcus laughed quietly. You notice too much. Lily wrapped her arms around him tightly. It's okay, she whispered. You always fix things. The words hit harder than she realized. Marcus hugged her back gently while staring out the classroom window. At Titan Apex Racing, things were getting worse by the hour. Late that evening, Daniel entered the engineering archive room searching through old technical files. He had spent most of the day watching younger engineers fail to understand systems Marcus could probably repair blindfolded. Something about Ethan's attitude continued bothering him. Then Daniel found it. An old design approval file dated nearly 12 years earlier. At the bottom corner sat a signature. M. Reed. Daniel frowned and pulled out another folder. Same initials. Another championship design. Another engine innovation. Another signed approval. His expression slowly changed from confusion to disbelief. One by one, Daniel opened older records stored deep inside the company archives. Nearly every major championship-winning system from Titan Apex's golden era contained Marcus's involvement somewhere inside the technical documentation. Not assistant work. Not maintenance. Core design architecture. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. How is this possible? He whispered. Before he could process further, an older employee standing nearby spoke quietly. You finally figured it out. Daniel turned to see Helen, one of the company's longest-serving administrative managers. She closed the archive cabinet gently before continuing. Marcus never cared about titles. Daniel looked stunned. Why would someone hide this? After his wife passed away, he stopped wanting attention. He turned down promotions, interviews, awards, everything. But Ethan has no idea. Helen gave a sad smile. Ethan thinks Titan Apex was built by executives and branding campaigns. Daniel looked back toward the files spread across the table. But Marcus built these engines. Helen nodded slowly. And half the people here learned from him without even realizing it. At that exact moment, Ethan stormed into the engineering department upstairs demanding answers about the failed simulations. Nobody had any. The pressure inside the company was becoming unbearable. Sponsors threatened penalties if the car could not compete properly. Racing analysts online started questioning whether Titan Apex had lost its technical edge after the founder's retirement. Then came the call that changed everything. Ethan's assistant rushed into his office looking pale. Sir, someone important is on the line. Ethan grabbed the phone impatiently. What? A deep older voice answered immediately. I just heard you fired Marcus Reed. Ethan straightened slightly. It was Arthur Vale, the retired founder of Titan Apex Racing. Ethan cleared his throat. Arthur, the situation was misunderstood. Cancel my meetings tomorrow. What? I'm returning to headquarters. The line disconnected instantly. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. For the first time since becoming CEO, genuine concern appeared across his face. The next morning, an unmistakable tension spread throughout Titan Apex before Arthur even arrived. Employees whispered quietly across hallways and workshops. Because everyone knew one thing. Arthur Vale never returned unless something was seriously wrong. And somewhere across the city, Marcus sat alone in his small garage workshop repairing an old lawnmower for a neighbor while Lily colored pictures nearby on the floor. His phone buzzed once on the table beside him. Marcus glanced at the screen. Daniel calling. Marcus stared at it for several seconds. Then he silently turned the phone face down and continued working. Rain clouds rolled over the city the next morning, covering the skyline in a heavy gray haze that matched the atmosphere inside Titan Apex Racing. Employees moved through the building quietly, conversations shorter than usual, footsteps slower. Even the constant noise of machinery seemed more tense. Everyone knew Arthur Vale had arrived. The founder rarely appeared in person anymore. Age and retirement had pulled him away from racing, but his presence still carried enormous weight inside the company. Mechanics who had worked there for decades still straightened their posture when he entered a room. Arthur walked through the main engineering floor slowly with a cane in one hand, observing everything in silence. His sharp eyes moved across stressed employees, half-disassembled engine parts, and exhausted engineers staring helplessly at diagnostic screens. Ethan followed beside him, trying to maintain confidence. We've identified several possible issues, Ethan explained carefully. The team is working around the clock. Arthur stopped near the race car and rested his hand against the hood. And Marcus? Ethan hesitated. He violated company protocol. Arthur looked at him without expression. That's not what I asked. For a moment, Ethan struggled to answer. He's no longer with the company. Silence spread across the garage. Arthur slowly turned toward the surrounding engineers. Who here can fully explain the adaptive pressure synchronization system in this engine? Nobody spoke. One engineer nervously adjusted his glasses. Another looked down at the floor. Arthur nodded once, almost sadly. That's what I thought. Ethan crossed his arms defensively. With respect, the company can't revolve around one mechanic. Arthur's expression hardened immediately. One mechanic, he repeated quietly. The older man slowly removed a folded handkerchief from his pocket and cleaned a small layer of dust from the engine. Do you know what Titan Apex looked like 20 years ago? He asked. Ethan stayed silent. We had 6 employees, one leaking garage, and a race car that broke down every other weekend. Arthur glanced toward the massive championship banners hanging across the walls. You see trophies, he continued. I see sleepless nights. The entire garage remained completely silent now. Marcus Reed was there before investors, Arthur said. Before sponsors. Before this company had enough money to replace broken tools. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Arthur looked directly at him. The engines that built this company. He said calmly. Marcus designed them. Several younger engineers exchanged stunned looks. Arthur continued walking slowly around the vehicle. He never wanted attention. Never wanted interviews. Never wanted his name printed on magazines. Arthur gave a faint smile. Truthfully, he hated all of it. Daniel watched Ethan carefully from nearby. For the first time, the CEO genuinely looked shaken. Arthur stopped again near the exposed engine components. And you fired him for fixing the car. Ethan lowered his voice. I didn't know. No, Arthur replied quietly. You didn't. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus was helping Lily tape fresh paint onto her school wind turbine project inside the garage behind their house. Rain tapped softly against the roof while old jazz music played quietly from a dusty radio near the workbench. Lily carefully pressed another piece of cardboard into place. You're distracted, she said suddenly. Marcus looked up from tightening a small bolt. Am I? You tightened the same screw 3 times. Marcus smiled faintly. You got me. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor studying him closely. Are you sad about your job? Marcus leaned back against the workbench for a moment before answering. A little. You can get another one. Probably. Then why do you look worried? Marcus stared at the rain outside the garage entrance. Because deep down, Titan Apex wasn't just a workplace to him. It was 20 years of his life. Memories of late nights building impossible systems. Racing failures. Victories. Friendships. Sacrifices. And beneath all of it existed something he rarely admitted aloud. Pride. Not in fame or recognition. But in the machines themselves. He had built them with his own hands. Lily quietly walked over and handed him a small paintbrush. You always tell me people make mistakes. Marcus accepted the brush slowly. I do. Maybe your boss made one too. Marcus looked at her for several seconds before softly laughing under his breath. You're smarter than me. I know. Back at Titan Apex, panic was beginning to spread. Another full system simulation had failed. This time, the engine shut down completely halfway through stress testing, sending warning lights across the entire garage. One engineer slammed his tablet onto a workbench in frustration. The calibration keeps fighting itself. Then rewrite the sequence. We already tried. No, you guessed, another snapped back. Ethan watched the arguments escalate while pressure built inside his chest. The championship race was less than 24 hours away. News outlets were already reporting possible technical instability within Titan Apex's new flagship vehicle. Online racing communities criticized the company's recent leadership changes. Sponsors demanded private meetings. Everything was beginning to unravel. Arthur quietly approached the diagnostic monitors again. Show me the pressure correction layers. An engineer pulled them up nervously. Arthur studied the data for a few seconds before shaking his head. You're missing the balancing logic. We can't find it, the engineer admitted. The system responds differently every cycle. Arthur sighed heavily. Because you're reading only half the architecture. Ethan frowned. What does that mean? Arthur looked directly at him. It means Marcus built adaptive response patterns nobody else here fully understands. The room fell silent again. Daniel finally stepped forward carefully. There's more. Everyone turned toward him. Daniel placed several old technical files onto the workbench. These were archived championship designs. Arthur recognized them instantly. Ethan opened the folders one by one. Every document contained the same initials. M. Reed. The deeper Ethan looked, the worse his expression became. Original engine layouts. Pressure stabilization systems. Prototype race modifications. Entire design frameworks. Marcus wasn't simply involved. He was everywhere. Ethan slowly sat down in a nearby chair, staring blankly at the papers. All this time, he muttered. Arthur's voice softened slightly. Marcus never cared about titles. That's why most people overlooked him. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face. I fired the man who built the company. Nobody answered. Because there was nothing left to say. Late that night, the championship race team transported the car to the massive Grand Crown Speedway. Floodlights illuminated the enormous track while media crews prepared for live coverage. Thousands of spectators would arrive by morning. Inside the Titan Apex garage area, engineers continued desperately trying to stabilize the engine. Nothing worked. Every adjustment created another failure somewhere else. Around midnight, Ethan finally walked outside alone into the empty pit lane. Rainwater reflected the stadium lights across the pavement. Arthur approached quietly beside him. You can still fix this, the founder said. Ethan laughed bitterly. How? Arthur looked toward the dark racetrack. By understanding something most executives forget. Ethan waited silently. Arthur continued. Companies aren't built by logos. They're built by people. The words stayed with Ethan long after Arthur walked away. Hours later, race day finally arrived. Crowds flooded the stadium. Cameras rolled across giant screens. Commentators discussed Titan Apex's rumored technical troubles while fans filled the grandstands with noise and excitement. Inside the garage, tension reached unbearable levels. The driver climbed into the race car for final warm-up testing. Engineers monitored every system carefully. For one brief moment, everything looked stable. Then suddenly, warning alarms exploded. The engine violently lost power. Smoke burst from the rear exhaust system as the entire vehicle shut down completely in front of cameras, sponsors, executives, and thousands of spectators. Panic instantly filled the garage. What happened? System collapse. We lost synchronization again. The driver climbed out furiously while reporters nearby started filming the chaos. Ethan stood frozen. The championship race would begin in less than 40 minutes. And Titan Apex's car was completely dead. Arthur slowly looked toward Ethan one final time. There's only one person who can save this now. Ethan already knew who he meant. Without another word, he grabbed his car keys and ran out of the stadium. Rain still covered the streets when Ethan sped across the city toward Marcus's neighborhood. The farther he drove from the glowing stadium lights and luxury corporate towers, the quieter everything became. Small houses replaced high-rise buildings. Narrow streets replaced polished business districts. For the first time in years, Ethan had nowhere to hide behind status or authority. Only the truth remained. Titan Apex was collapsing. And it was collapsing because of him. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he replayed the past few days over and over in his mind. Marcus standing quietly beside the race car. The calm explanation. The silence after being fired. Ethan realized something that made the guilt worse. Marcus never once tried to defend himself. He had simply accepted the humiliation and walked away. By the time Ethan finally reached Marcus's street, the rain had slowed to a light drizzle. He parked beside the small house and sat motionless inside the car for several seconds. The home looked ordinary. A bicycle leaned near the porch steps. Warm kitchen light glowed softly through the curtains. Someone had drawn colorful chalk flowers along the sidewalk near the driveway. It didn't look like the home of a man responsible for building championship-winning race cars. Ethan stepped out slowly and approached the front door. Before he could knock, he heard laughter inside. Not loud, just small, real laughter. The kind money could never manufacture. Ethan hesitated, then finally knocked twice. A few seconds later, the door opened. Marcus stood there wearing a faded gray sweater instead of mechanic overalls. Reading glasses rested slightly lower on his nose, and a pencil sat behind one ear. He looked surprised to see Ethan standing on his porch. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Marcus quietly opened the door wider. "Come in before you freeze." The kindness somehow made Ethan feel even worse. Inside, the house smelled like tomato soup and fresh bread. Lily sat at the kitchen table surrounded by schoolbooks and colored pencils. She looked up curiously when Ethan entered. Marcus removed the pencil from behind his ear. "Lily, this is Ethan. The boss who fired you," she asked immediately. Ethan nearly choked on his own breath. Marcus sighed softly. "Lily, what? You said honesty matters." Ethan actually laughed once despite the situation. "That's fair." Lily studied him for another moment before returning to her homework. Marcus motioned toward the kitchen table. "Sit." Ethan sat carefully while Marcus poured coffee into two mismatched mugs. For several seconds, only the sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the room. Finally, Ethan spoke. "The car failed completely." Marcus nodded slightly as if he already expected that. "We're out of time," Ethan continued. "The race starts soon." Marcus stirred his coffee quietly. Ethan looked directly at him. "I was wrong." Marcus stayed silent. "I judged you before I understood anything," Ethan admitted. "And I humiliated you in front of everyone." Still no response. Ethan lowered his voice. "Arthur showed me the files." Marcus's eyes shifted slightly for the first time. "The engines, the systems, the championship designs." Ethan shook his head slowly. "You built all of it." Marcus finally leaned back in his chair. "Not alone. But you never told anyone." Marcus looked toward Lily, who remained focused on homework nearby. "A long time ago," he said quietly, "I thought success meant building the fastest machines in the world." His voice carried no bitterness. Only honesty. "Then my wife got sick." The room grew still. Marcus continued carefully. "When she passed away, none of the trophies mattered anymore. None of the interviews. None of the recognition." He glanced toward Lily again. "I just wanted a quieter life." Ethan listened without interrupting. "So you stayed hidden." Marcus shrugged faintly. "The work still mattered to me. I just stopped needing credit for it." Those words hit Ethan harder than any accusation could have. Because deep down, Ethan had spent most of his career chasing recognition. Titles, respect, control. Meanwhile, the man sitting across from him had quietly built an empire without demanding applause once. Ethan finally looked down at the table. "I don't know how to fix this." Marcus studied him carefully for several seconds. Then Lily suddenly spoke without looking up from her homework. "Dad says machines stop working when people ignore the important parts." Marcus blinked once. Ethan slowly smiled despite himself. "She really does notice everything. She gets that from her mother," Marcus said softly. Silence settled over the room again. Finally, Ethan stood. "I understand if you never want to come back." Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the kitchen counter and stared out the rain-covered window. Far away across the city, bright stadium lights glowed against the clouds. Titan Apex. 20 years of his life. His hands rested quietly against the countertop as memories flooded back. The first engine he ever built there. Arthur teaching him race strategy after midnight. Victory celebrations. Failures. Sacrifices. And hundreds of exhausted nights spent chasing perfection. Then he looked toward Lily. She smiled at him gently. "Go help your car," she said. Marcus laughed quietly under his breath. "It's not my car anymore." "Maybe not," Lily replied. "But you still care." That was the problem. He did. Marcus grabbed his old workshop jacket hanging beside the door. Ethan looked stunned. "You'll come." Marcus locked eyes with him calmly. "I'm helping the team," he said. "Not your reputation." Ethan nodded immediately. "Understood." The drive back to the stadium felt completely different from the drive there. No arguments. No speeches. Only quiet understanding. When they arrived, panic still filled the Titan Apex garage. Engineers rushed between equipment while reporters gathered outside trying to capture updates. Then Marcus walked in. The room instantly went silent. Every mechanic turned toward him. Daniel's face lit up with relief. "You actually came." Marcus placed his toolbox beside the disabled race car. "Show me the diagnostics." Within seconds, the entire atmosphere inside the garage changed. Panic gave way to focus. People moved with purpose again. Marcus climbed beside the exposed engine while engineers quickly explained the latest failures. He listened quietly. Then he reached toward the calibration panel and frowned immediately. There. One engineer blinked. "What?" Marcus pointed toward a tiny sequence buried deep inside the software architecture. Someone modified the adaptive pressure limiter. We thought that increased performance. It did, Marcus replied calmly. For 6 seconds, several engineers exchanged embarrassed looks. Marcus connected a diagnostic module and began rewriting the synchronization layers with astonishing speed. His movements carried complete confidence, like a musician returning to a familiar instrument. Ethan watched silently nearby. For the first time, he truly understood how much knowledge Marcus carried inside his head. Not theory. Experience. Years of it. Marcus suddenly stopped typing. Restart the system. One mechanic hesitated nervously before pressing the ignition controls. The engine roared to life instantly. Smooth. Controlled. Perfect. Every monitor across the garage stabilized. No warning lights. No fluctuations. Just power. The entire team froze for half a second before cheers erupted across the garage. Daniel laughed loudly while slapping another mechanic on the shoulder. We're back. Even exhausted engineers started smiling in disbelief. Marcus stepped away from the engine calmly, wiping grease from his hands with an old cloth. Ethan approached slowly. That's it. Marcus nodded once. That's it. Ethan stared at the perfectly running engine almost speechless. You fixed in 10 minutes what the entire company couldn't solve in 2 days. Marcus gave a tired smile. You were all trying to force the engine to obey. He glanced toward the car. Sometimes systems work better when you understand what they're trying to protect. The race began 30 minutes later. Crowds filled the stadium with deafening energy as cars exploded across the track under blazing lights. Titan Apex started from near the back after the technical delays, and commentators openly doubted whether the vehicle could even finish the race. But lap after lap, the car grew faster, smoother, stronger. By the second half of the race, the Titan Apex driver began overtaking competitors one after another. The stadium erupted as the car surged into first place during the final laps. Inside the garage, mechanics shouted with excitement while engineers stared at performance monitors in disbelief. Marcus stood quietly near the back watching the race with folded arms. No celebration, no spotlight, just quiet satisfaction. When the checkered flag finally waved and Titan Apex won the championship, the entire stadium exploded with noise. Cameras rushed toward Ethan expecting interviews and victory speeches. But before reporters could ask questions, Ethan stepped onto the winner's platform and raised one hand for silence. Then he did something nobody expected. He turned toward Marcus standing near the garage entrance. This victory belongs to the man who built the heart of this company long before I ever arrived, Ethan announced. The cameras immediately swung toward Marcus. Thousands of spectators applauded while confused reporters scrambled for information. Marcus looked deeply uncomfortable with the attention. Arthur smiled proudly nearby. Ethan continued. I made the biggest mistake of my career when I failed to recognize him. He looked directly at Marcus. And I'm sorry. For a moment, the entire stadium seemed quiet. Marcus simply nodded once. Nothing dramatic. Nothing theatrical. Just understanding. Later that night, after the crowds disappeared and the celebration finally calmed, Ethan approached Marcus privately inside the empty garage. I want you back, Ethan said seriously. Leadership position. Full authority. Anything you want. Marcus looked around the garage thoughtfully. Then he smiled faintly. I'll help mentor the younger engineers. Ethan blinked. That's all. Marcus nodded. And I leave by 5 every day. Ethan looked confused. Marcus pointed toward the small chalk drawing Lily had secretly slipped into his toolbox earlier that morning. Because my real job starts at home. For the first time in a long while, Ethan smiled without pressure or ego attached to it. Deal. As Marcus picked up his toolbox to leave, something slipped loose from the bottom compartment and fell onto the workbench. Arthur noticed it first. An old folded blueprint. Yellowed with age. Arthur slowly opened it. His eyes widened slightly. What is it? Ethan asked. Arthur looked toward Marcus with surprise. This, Arthur said quietly, is the unfinished design for the fastest engine Marcus ever dreamed of building. Ethan stared at the blueprint. Then back at Marcus. Marcus simply smiled faintly before walking toward the garage exit where Lily waited sleepily beside the doorway. And somewhere deep inside Titan Apex Racing, a brand new future had just begun.